The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Hi, and welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast where science and other fields of study get connected to Star Wars. I'm one of your co-hosts, James Floyd, a freelance writer for StarWars.com and Star Wars Insider Magazine, and author of Star Wars Crossword Puzzles and Other Word Games from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. At Comic-Con 2025, we hosted two panels. This is my panel, Andor, from Resistance to Rebellion. And on the panel, we have Dr. Drea Letamendi, Dr. Catherine Hicks, Desmond Hassing, Robert Dagnall, sci-fi author Jendia Gammon, and myself as moderator. We hope you enjoy it. If you go on to our Star Warsologies YouTube, we will have the slides that we are talking about as we discuss things. So sit back and enjoy.
Welcome to Star Wars Andor from Resistance to Rebellion. All right, I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves just to go down the line and kind of say who we are and why we're up here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Desmond Hassing. I'm a lecturer in the Department of American Indian Studies at San Diego State University, where my research focuses on images and iconography of indigeneity and how those images were used to help construct Western American identity.
I'm Jendia Gammon. I am an author, science writer, and editor-in-chief of Stars and Sabers Publishing, and I hail from Appalachia originally, now living in LA, so I'm here from the speculative fiction writing standpoint. Thank you for coming.
I'm Dr. Cat Hicks. I'm a psychological scientist. I study people's networks of beliefs, and especially how beliefs help us form coalitions or destroy coalitions. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about Andor, which to me is all about coalitions.
Hi, I'm Robert Dagnall. I'm an instructor at San Diego State University. Any love for the I'm also a master's candidate in rhetoric and writing studies, and I've been a professional resume writer for 30 years. All of which means I'm here to talk about what Aristotle called observing in any given situation all available means of persuasion. So, fight the Empire.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Happy Thursday at Comic-Con. My name is Dr. Drea Letamendi. I'm a licensed board-certified psychologist. I work at UCLA during the day, and my other persona is as a media consultant for entertainment studios. So I work with creators, artists, writers, storytelling that you see on screen, and some behind-the-scenes work as well. And I'm definitely here to talk about the mental health and brain science of Andor.
These are our panelists. My name is James Floyd. I'm your moderator for this panel. I am the author of Star Wars Crossword Puzzles and Other Word Games from a Galaxy Far, Far Away, which came out last year. I am one of the hosts of the podcast Star Warsologies. This panel is being recorded for that, so if you have friends that want to listen in, we will have it up in a week or two after Comic-Con once we recover. All right, the first thing I want to get into is, we have resistance and rebellion in Star Wars, and they're often, capital letters, but, what are resistance and rebellion? Just the small letters. What causes us to rebel, and what's the difference, really?
I could jump in. Something that I find really, really interesting is we often think about the groups we belong to as super fixed, static categories, right? Like, I just am this thing. I am a member of this group. But there's a really important and kind of cutting-edge wave of psychology right now that focuses on how we reshape our identities and groups. So when you say, what's that, small r moment of resistance or small r moment of rebellion, something I think about is people inside of a group who decide, my group needs to change, actually. We have to change, the norms of this group. So I think about all of the little pieces in Andor where we see people kind of try to figure out, are we going to be able to create a new group that doesn't really exist anymore? And how am I going to stack up all these little actions of dissent and bravery into what will eventually become the capital R resistance, right?
Yeah, that basically covers it. There's resistance, we see in the show. We see it throughout Star Wars, and you know, public protests. It's some of it's organized, but a lot of it is just people showing up. Like we learned in Rise of Skywalker, it's just people, and this is, you know, people showing up and voicing together, and you know, public protest is a really valuable way that shows the powers that be that, hey, people are not happy with the situation and things need to change.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me, there's this great theory called the normative conflict model of dissent. So if you want like an academic, you know, phrase to drop in, and it shows us in Psych that, you know, sometimes actually the most conscientious people, the people who are the most, you know, sort of diligent and conscientious about what their group is doing in the world, those are sometimes the people who are also protesting the most. And they can get really criticized and treated like a black sheep, a troublemaker, right, a rabble-rouser, maybe someone who just doesn't care about law and order. I think we see that play out in Andor quite a bit. Like, what is the narrative going to be that these folks are bravely standing up and trying to express something as a population, or are they just disorderly people? That's something that came to mind for me watching the show.
Well, as John Lewis said, good trouble.
Yeah, something that Andor, I think, really exemplifies is that contributions for social justice movements or any kind of social movement vary and differ, and it's not the same people doing the same things. That, you know, in our world, it takes multiple contributions of different types and different abilities. So some folks think about like a social justice meal or pie, or you think about like, I think sometimes we feel intimidated. How do I get involved? What do I do? I can't do it all. I'm overwhelmed. I'm numb. All my nervous system is messed up because I'm in constant fight or flight. And the assurance around this dynamic of resistance and rebellion is that resistance truly is everyday micro behaviors. Whether you're speaking up, whether you're calling folks in, whether you're speaking out about something in person, online, in using your dollar to make a difference. So resistance is really these like micro behaviors and micro affirmations that help us, especially in minoritized communities who are oppressed, feel like, okay, we're still a part of this movement, we're still a part of what matters. Whereas rebellion is a lot more visible, a lot more action, and could teeter to, revolution, could teeter into more explosive, more dynamic, and consequential situations that could be more the same.
And moving on, there's as Nemec says, try, and that's something we'll get back to in a little bit. But there's just little things you can do. Who here remembers these two from Andor in the Senate, and who thinks that they intentionally did what they did? These are the two texts in the Senate press office that locked the door that was supposed to be locked, but finally wasn't locked. They did it so that the guy that was supposed to cut the feed couldn't get in until he went and got a key.
There's a great line in season 1 about that says, even the smallest act of insurrection puts our lines forward. And I think that when resistance starts small, it starts even at the table when you're breaking bread. When it starts in the little moments where you're clanging on a pipe, sending a message that only a few of you really know what it means.
Some other ways to distinguish between resistance and rebellion. Some people say resistance is surviving the existing order, the existing society. Rebellion is actively trying to change the order of society or change the government. And resistance can be more about, what Red said, about small actions. It can be non-cooperation, malicious compliance, like stonewalling, disobedience, as contrasted with open conflict.
I also think there's a tension in the show between resistance and rebellion that centers on expressions of the self. The very first episode of the second season, we have, I believe the character's name is Nyla, the tech working on Cinar, who asks Cassian if she dies tonight, is it worth it? And what she wants to hear is that, yes, if I die tonight, materially the rebellion will be strengthened and a good thing will happen. And instead of telling her that anything they're doing in that space is going to bring about the change she wants, it's worth it because resistance is a reclaiming of the self, that she is coming into herself. And it points to the fact that, especially in fascism, part of existing and surviving in that system is subsuming what the self wants to do in favor of what the mass says. And then throughout the course of the season, Andor is constantly put into the position of needing to subsume his self in order to accomplish some type of organized goal of the group, the rebellion. So I think the show is not trying to suggest that either resistance or rebellion is better than the other, per se, right? That one is better and one is worse. But instead that there are unique ways in which all people respond to these types of environments, these types of oppressive systems, that obligates us from time to time to come back to the self, to reclaim our own ideals, and other times where we have to remove those elements of the self to some place beneath the surface in order to accomplish the overall goals of like an organization.
Definitely, and resistance kind of moves up to some bigger acts. I think Drea mentioned the word explosive a little bit earlier. But then we get into issues of like Mon Mothma. Is she resisting? Is she rebelling? At this point, when she gives her speech, and she defiantly walks out, but also then goes on the run, and is off to start the rebellion essentially.
Yeah, I think that it's so interesting to watch Mon Mothma for me from multiple perspectives as a mother of someone who comes of age, who may or may not believe in the things that I do, and then you have to make a choice, and a painful choice in her case, of choosing to let her family go because the greater good demands her participation. And if she didn't do that, I don't think it would have got as far, or certainly it would have taken more effort. So she moves, she's walking through history, kind of resisting behind the scenes. But at the moment she takes that choice, that door's locked behind her. She's in the Senate. That's the rebellion. She's made the choice. Her family is the fighters.
Can we talk about the dance that she does?
Or should we wait till we dive into Mon Mothma?
Okay. We'll get there. Well, I mean, something else that I think really sets apart what the Empire is doing and what here the growing rebels are doing really comes from a set of motivations that exist in our real world, and that the Empire is exhibiting a lot of predatory violence. So there's a lot of types of violence, but the forensic psychology talks about affective violence, which is motivated by emotion, passion, anger, fear. Maybe it's just really personal, and it's very reactive, whereas predatory violence is what we're seeing a lot with the Imperials. I'm not saying they're not emotional, but there's a sameness about it, there's a structure about it, there's a forcing of, you can't be an individual here, and you're operating from a sense of lack of emotion. This is all operational. And what I want to mention here about, James, what you're talking about with this sort of moment in time for her identity is that she may be moving from that emotionally driven part of her identity to having to take on the tools. This is what Luthen said, right? We have to take on the tools of our enemies, and in this case, operationally come from a place that is more predatory and more action-oriented than emotional.
I think a lot, about how Andor showed that a politician could have a job to do, actually. In the franchise, it's sometimes very cynical about whether the senators do anything or not. And I think it's interesting because, when you think about even just learning to see the oppression that's around you, right? Like that violence, which is, it's so systematized, right? And as I think it's a beautiful point that it's like it takes you away from yourself. You actually have to kind of suppress parts of yourself to continue to survive. And to me, it was so moving to see these characters grapple with how do I just even name that this is happening? Say it's not okay, even if I don't have the solution for it. And that is, to me, an incredibly brave action. It shows kind of true across the character choices of Andor that people constantly are speaking beyond their own life and beyond their own society. And what that brings up for me is something that we often call like coalitional cognition, like the idea that you can really start to activate these parts of your mind that are capable of feeling empathy, like empathy beyond, beyond ferrets, beyond like the individual groups that you're sort of locked in survival mode in. And I feel like with Mon Mothma's speech, she's giving an example of having empathy in a world that is just crushing it out of people.
Definitely we just went to the dark side a moment ago. We're back to the light side, which is good. The Gorman front, there's obvious historical parallels there to many resistance movements, including the French resistance during World War II. Are they a resistance or are they a rebellion?
Could you repeat that?
He wants to know if the Gorman group or the Gorman resistance is what we would think of as, are they a people trying to survive or are they a rebel organization? And I think the show makes this pretty clear when Andor decides there's no good will come from arming them. Because there is part of it is just the simple logistics of it, the fact that armed resistance on their planet has one inevitable outcome. They're too isolated. There's no way for them. The population's too small. But there's also an acknowledgement in it that these are just a group of people struggling to survive. One of the things that I study at San Diego State is the ways in which the American psyche responds to stories about indigenous genocide. One of the things that Andor gives us that most other products that discuss that's different is the fact that all of the indigenous peoples that are in this universe, the people of Ferrix, the people of Gorman, they don't present as traditional indigenous peoples, and therefore because of it, we don't bring in a lot of our own underlying assumptions about how we're supposed to respond to this situation, right? We don't look at it with eyes that suggest that, the cowboys should necessarily be the good guys, because all the Westerns we've ever seen suggest the cowboys are the good guys. So I think they are very much a people resisting rather than a rebellion, but I'm certainly interested in hearing if anyone else on the panel has a differing view on that.
I'd have to agree because, and Andor being very uneasy about how they're going about things and how disastrous it could potentially be. They're not there yet. You could tell that they've really started thinking about it. They're working on it, but it's not quite there, in my opinion.
I think events show that Cassian was right, that they should not become a rebellion, which is why they are armed. They're armed by the Empire because it backfires on them. It's a way that the Empire using them as proxies to create a pretext for the Empire to do what it does best. Escalate.
So they sort of becomes like a puppet rebellion. The Empire wants to sort of instrumentally use this community to tip over into their right to overreach their military control. So, and I agree that, I don't necessarily say all of these people are representing one identity or movement, but any time that your entire cultural identity is threatened and the existence of your cultural identity is threatened, it becomes politicized inherently. And so there's a helplessness there where I think it's a survival mechanism. There are only choices to be in resistance. And the Empire operationally wants to sort of, leverage that in order to make a bigger message into the universe. Use this as an example. Do not resist because this will be your fate.
I think that's a really important point, and maybe I'll be the counter voice. I think it's a rebellion. I think they have moral ambition to change the rule that's happening on their planet, and to also communicate that to other planets and the galaxy. And I don't care that hard, I guess, about where we draw the line, but I do think that it's important to note that most rebellions fail. There are countless moments of really brave failed rebellions, and also such a poignant, beautiful point, the way that everything you try, standing up and singing together about your beautiful culture, is suddenly turned into this, charade of violence, right? I found that it actually brings tears to my eyes like right now. It's so real in the world how this happens. So I think that we should just be careful to not make success, the way that the litmus test for whether something's a rebellion or not, right? Because maybe you have to fail and fail and fail and then eventually get there.
Yeah, and I think, we say that the Empire is kind of controlling them as a puppet, but also Luthen is too, that, he wants them to crash and burn because they will burn brightly, because his objective is the overall war, whereas, on Gorman, their own preservation. And you mentioned the kind of the threatening of the whole culture. You see the one character of Lazine who is at the meeting and he tells off the town leaders. But later on, he's the one that starts singing the anthem. He's the one that after the failed heist, he's the one that shows up and he kind of pacifies as like, we are Gorman. We need to do this together. And so he's not so much in it for a rebellion, but he's in it for holding his culture. We got lots of people fighting the Empire in the movie or in the show. As you can see, some of them win, some of them don't. Anto Krieger eliminated. Maya Brigade. We saw what happened to them. The Cloud Riders from Solo, they're maybe still out there. Gorman Resistance, not so much. The Aldani Cell. With the Rebel Alliance, that Saw Gerrera's partisan front, they survive a little bit, like Saw doesn't in Rogue One, but they live to fight another day. But then we get the Rebel Alliance, and that's a coming together. It's a true alliance that after Mon Mothma leaves, she gives a speech from the Ghost in Rebels, basically calling anyone who wants to rebel, please join us. If you're running a cell group, please join us. And so we get all these groups coming together. So how does that work, kind of bringing different groups together into one unified rebellion?
Yeah, I'll jump into this. I love this stuff, man. I'm a huge nerd about distributed cognition and the idea that groups of people, make collective decisions. Sometimes the groups we're in shape our memory. That can be a really beautiful thing, like how culture holds memory and we reinforce and tell each other certain stories. And it can be a problematic thing because we get into groupthink, right? Or you hear the story repeated by the people in your group in one way and it kind of filters how you see things. So I think it's so powerful how Andor shows both momentum that's kind of breaking out on all fronts, like those little acts of rebellion happening everywhere, and yet also it's almost as if as soon as a group is formed, we can find ways to fight with each other and say, you're not doing it right, and you're not on my side exactly. And this is such a tremendous challenge for forming any kind of momentum in the world and getting anything done and coordinating. So I saw that, and of course, in particular, that very frustrating episode, right, where Andor is like crashed into the middle of this fight that he hardly even knows what the origin of it is, right? And I think them spending time with that frustration was really compelling to me because so often the rebels in Star Wars are a purely united front. The strategic plan is laid out, but how many of us have ever been part of like a company or a group and had a strategic plan handed down that just said, I'm not bought into this at all, right? So that skill set of actually getting people to buy in both from the bottom up and communicating from the top down it's critical for those two pieces to come together, I think, when you want to make lots of different little groups realize they have what we call a shared fate. Hey, we might not like each other, but we're going to rise or fall together, and we better get on board with that. And that is something that has been shown to work to help get people to support policy change, for instance, that doesn't necessarily benefit them. But if you can help people see this benefits this one group, and there's a history of this group not getting what they should have, you can actually have a heroic role in the story and they're part of your community instead of break down kind of the in-group, out-group stuff we tend to do and see you can show up and be a group member, including with people that maybe got on your nerves quite a bit, So those are the thoughts that come to mind for me there.
So we're going to move on to some of the characters. We've got this guy that I think he's on the show, Cassian Andor, that he believes that he really just wants to make his own choices. But what kind of motivates somebody like Cassian, and what do we see his character growing into throughout this season?
Oh, I'd like to jump in on that one because of his mother and how her final projection, Ferrex, that, she says to everyone, we've been sleeping, and that if she could go back, it's too late, but if she could go back, she'd wake up early, fight the Empire, and I think that he's watching that as things are about to really just explode, and I think he takes that with him, and the show, I think, repeatedly comes back to different themes of family, found family or adopted family or, family that you're marrying off to sustain things at home so you can focus on what's out there. So, but in Cassian's case, I think it comes back to his mother taking him and raising him and instilling in him those values that, it's not okay what's happening, and that it's time to wake up.
Something else that Margaret contributes through Brasso is the line about telling me he knows everything he needs to know, feels everything he needs to feel. When the day comes, those two pull together, he will be an unstoppable force for good.
Yeah.
So part of the character arc of Cassian, especially in the first season, is he's learning about the situation. He's starting to listen, become aware of what's happening. What he needs, what he's missing is what Aristotle calls ethos, which is character and authority. And that's why, for instance, at the Narkina 5 prison, Cassian says Kino has to be the one that gets on the public address system and tells everyone to unite, and it's time to go and you have to help each other out. Kind of incites that rebellion at the prison. It has to be someone that has standing and authority with the prisoners. They don't really know who Cassian is. That's also why I think later you meet Mon Mothma. That's what she contributes to the Rebel Alliance, is she becomes someone with enough character and standing with all the different factions that they may not like each other, but they will unite behind her.
I like that he comes to get her. That's the moment. That's finally it. This is really for real, and the journey from Cassian meeting Mon Mothma, getting her out of there.
I think that too, we see a lot of character development. This is a kid who's from Canard. I think this is a planet which is meant to represent an indigenous, what I was interpreting as a community that was wiped out and that was essentially erased. But that erasure and that abandonment and that isolation led him to a quest of what am I? What am I about? What are my values? What's my purpose? How do I matter? And a huge sense of belongingness. And for Luthen to notice, this young guy is looking for a purpose and belongingness. What better person to bring in to this movement? But for Cassian in particular, I recall that David Luna talks a lot about his accent and how he's been acting for a very long time. When he came to the States, folks, producers, other actors would say, "Are you going to clean up your accent?" And he's like, "I don't feel my accent dirty necessarily, but I keep hearing, I kept hearing words, but you're going to clean up your accent." And I think that his accent happens to raise his otherness. We don't hear a lot of British accents and other types of accents, but he really stands out as other in his journey, especially in season 1. And in season 2, he becomes a master of code switching, of spyhood, of identity shifting. And I think this is true for a lot of us in mixed identities and first gen folks of immigrants, folks of this country who learn to code switch to survive. But he's learned to code switch to be a particularly important instrument in this movement. And I'm mixed about that. I have mixed feelings. My reactions are, while I like that he's found what he's good at, I also wonder if this is a consequence of other people kind of like trying to make him into this character. They're leveraging his identity and his background.
And then we get the Force healer that says, he's a messenger. He's meant for bigger things, and Bix, believes that about him. And the whole time he's like, I'm going to go do my own thing. And General Draven's like, you're busted, you're grounded. And then a year later, you did it again. We need you to be a leader. So what is that tension in him that wants to just jump off and do things versus, oh right, I guess I'm supposed to be the leader. Or we'll talk about Mon Mothma.
It's okay. Sometimes we just needed the chance to think, James. That's all. He is a rebel. He's also been conditioned by his parents to view the foundations as being slightly more important than the average person. And I don't mean to suggest that for a matter of like conserving those foundations, right? But we have an entire speech in the first season with him and Clem, where Clem points out all of the value in cleaning a bunch of motivators that have fallen into disuse and ill repair because they're covered in rust. When Marva is talking about what's wrong with the Empire, she talks about it being overtaken by rust. And when you go back to look at Clem's speech, he says people don't take enough time to look past the rust, right? So I think when you couple that with the ways in which Cassian, when he's doing recruitment in the show, is always positioning about it being your personal choice. That's where the merit comes in resistance, rebellion, whatever word you want to use for it. One of the reasons I think he welcomes Mon Mothma to the rebellion at that moment in the show is not just hyperbole on his part or a way to break the tension. I think it's that until she gives that speech, it's important to remember that both her and Bail Organa have been in the Senate since before the fall of the Republic. So to a degree, while they're rebelling, while they're resisting the Empire, they're also trying to reclaim the institution they love. And that moment, it's the point at which she's no longer trying to convince the Senate. She's just trying to convince the people. And in doing that, she's trying to seize political authority for her ideology, her beliefs. And in that moment, that's why I think he welcomes her to it. So what you have in Cassian is a character who thinks that interconnection and empathy are the things that is most being taken by this system, and that lack of empathy is what needs to be addressed. And so the truth is that, like, how does it create empathy to send units out to get killed on the battlefield? It doesn't. How does it create empathy to go into the enemy's den at Coruscant and take Leia out of there and be the person in the rebellion that honors their word even when the leaders don't want to, right? So I think it's methodological for him, right? This is the way in which he needs to resist, the way in which he needs to do it, which is less about running off on foolhardy missions himself in order to try to, die gloriously in fighting the Empire, as much as it is there is a lack of political resolve at higher levels to do that type of empathy and grassroots world building, right? And he's just been conditioned by his parents to think that when the rules don't work, you just don't follow the rules, right? Like the first actions we see Marva and Clem doing is illegal salvage. It's the very first thing they do in the show, in their backstory. And it's very clear in that moment that their resistance to the forces they face in the Empire didn't begin with the Empire. It began with the Republic, right? We're talking about a group of people who may be under the authority of this giant galactic government, but they don't certainly feel like they have the full enfranchisement of being citizens, right? They don't feel they have a say.
And I know we kind of touched on Mon Mothma. I want to move on to Luthen and Leia. Is Leia the real Axis? What do you guys think? Certainly becomes it. Okay. Any thoughts on Luthen and Leia? We've been given like the 15-minute thing, so we're going to start doing lightning rounds.
I'll just go real fast. I don't think there is an Axis. I think Axis is a fantasy in Dedra's mind, that somewhere there is an ultimate authority that controls everything. And if I can just find that person, I can destroy the rebellion. Look, Luthen says it himself. you can't win. Rebellion's gone. It flew away, right? Like, was there a moment in which you kill the two of them that maybe you stop a rebellion for a few years? Sure. But what's creating the rebellion? It's the behavior of the government.
There's a concept in psychology I really like because it challenges some of our conceptions of what heroism is. And it's this concept called the small cell. And if you ever think about being in a big redwood forest, maybe you felt this, like I'm very small in the universe, but it's not a bad thing. It's actually sometimes like a really beautiful thing. And sometimes people talk about it like realizing you're part of an ecosystem, and it also relates to feelings of, when people have this feeling, they have feelings of self-transcendence. And the idea of, my actions live beyond my lifetime. These are like powerful feelings like awe and empathy, and a kind of setting down of your own ego, which I think it's super interesting in Andor that there are a lot of choices presented, but there's also a lot of conversation about, well, what don't we have a choice about, And I actually thought that was very brave storytelling. I mean, I'd love to hear from the writer here, but I think that it's really interesting, these conversations that say, there will never be a version of the universe in which your children will have choice unless we fight for it. It's just either give up or fight. There's no version of this that is, I get to go live the life that I'm fantasizing about. And I think in some ways that acknowledgement in some of these conversations that we're dealing with what's been given to us it's a bit of a breath of relief almost. Like, all right, there actually isn't a choice. I have to engage with this because this is, again, the actions of the Empire created this world we're all playing in.
And I think that, certainly we have these actions that we're kind of forced to take. And that brings us to, making some big choices. And we see that some of those big choices in characters like Bix and Vel. So any thoughts on that?
There's a lot of sacrifice for both of those women. There's a lot they've both been through. They've had loss. They've been attacked. They've seen people they love go off to an unknown or perhaps known fate in terms of Vel. And sometimes picking yourself up after extraordinary tragedy it's just a task that seems impossible. But then you have to kind of remember that, like is said in the show, you become bigger than your fear. And that the people that fought beside you or that you loved and that maybe you started a family with, you have to carry on for what they stood for, and that certainly became literally true with Biggs. And in Vel's case, she's on Yavin. She's ready to rock and roll with this rebellion. And she's honoring the memory of who she loved, So it's family, it's love. Let's honor them. Let's become bigger than our fear, and let's do this.
I think the writers too really were very direct and clear about how this movement, how this everyday work, I could use the word over-identification. When your identity becomes this movement, you don't have a separate identity. It can be incredibly taxing on your emotional well-being. And for the writers to include Biggs' symptoms of PTSD, the nightmares, the flashbacks, the terror, the drug use, to numb those memories, and ultimately the decision that this ain't for me. Who am I? I'm a shallow person. I'm numbed out. I'm not affected. I'm not being recruited to, I'm no longer useful. That breakdown, and I hate the word mental breakdown. I just mean the persona breakdown. The identity crisis is really, very clear with her. And her need to overcome being the narrator of her own story, which is, I think, one of the most powerful stories we'll see with an individual character is her timeline.
And then moving on to some of, talking about moving on in ambition. Just Dedra and Luthen, go. I know Desmond's got some thoughts.
I've got.
Nope, Robert does.
I've written a small essay on this, so if you want to email me, I'll send it to you. So I was thinking about Luthen's monologue with season 1. It says, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror for an audience with a light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything. And then it occurred to me that Dedra is his mirror and his audience for his ego. Nobody else can be. And she also craves a meeting with Axis when she finally confronts him, and she says, "I have dreamt for this, too many versions to remember." So I see them as like, they're like worthy opponents. Okay, they're Holmes and Moriarty. They are uniquely qualified to appreciate each other's work and appreciate their skills. And I think it's interesting that they're both driven by their egos to this confrontation. Dedra has to overplay it because that's what Luthen is going to make people do, especially the Empire. And she acts like Khan from Star Trek 2. You know, I wanted you to know first who it was who had beaten you. So while she's monologuing and voting, and she actually hands him back the leader of the night, it's interesting that they both died from self-inflicted wounds in that moment. Luthen kills himself to protect the Axis network of the rebellion, to kill what he knows. She destroys her position and loses everything in that moment. So I thought that I like that pairing.
I think Luthen's chapter that degrees always fascinates me because he's like displaying the exploitations of his enemy, like just with such flamboyant directness. These are artifacts from dead Jedi and communities who've been raised, and he's just on display with like just almost a big FU to what the oppressors were doing. And also the performance is interesting because when we think about code switching, how some of us have to infiltrate in order to be a part of this movement, that what joy might he also be getting out of the opulence and out of the gains. Whereas, you know, if you're a laborer at Luthen Rael, that farm, you know, if you don't have your visa, you're going to be detained. You know, you're the day laborer. The lives, the juxtapositions are so interesting here.
Yeah, so, you know, talking about kind of Gorman as a tipping point, that, you know, what can be the tipping point versus what can't be. You know, if there was response at Gorman, would there have been an Alderaan? And if, you know, Alderaan was unmet, would there have been a Chandrilla? Things like that. So what forms a tipping point in how rebelling works?
Well, not necessarily Gorman, but at Ferrix, you tip over E2
Yeah, and I mean, it's important to remember that what happens to Gorman has already happened to Ferrix, right? Wilmar tells us that. She's the one who burned Ferrix, okay? That riot may have stopped, but the planet was punished for that riot. It's that simple. If you're thinking about in terms of like the storytelling of the show, what makes Gorman the tipping point, it's everything that Luthen finds appealing about arming them. It is the fact that there may only be 800,000 of them. It may be easier to, you know, cause a bunch of death and force removal of them. These are things that are easy for the Empire to do. It's very difficult for the Empire to make Gorman less well-known than it is. And the things that happened on Ferrix are easy for the Empire to wish away and make not happen, because most people in the grand scheme of things have no idea where and what Ferrix is, right? This is a particular environment in which all of the motivation for the Empire is geared towards whatever is the most expedient solution rather than what is the best from a communication standpoint. And it's a group of people who, while not politically empowered, have the ability to spread the word about what happened to them, and people will, I don't know if care is the right word, right? But the people will know that it's happening because they in some way know what this place is. They will be put into a series of conversations that force them to have an opinion on the issue. And when you're trying to win a communications campaign, that's an important part of the process.
All right, we've got to slide along, but I just wanted to throw up you know, the depth of truth and how truth matters and facts matter, and, you know, knowing what's going on, being informed, fighting misinformation, we're going to skip over some of these. Okay, the real thing that we want to focus on here, our takeaway message, is Nemec. He says, remember, try. So why is trying important than there is no trying?
I mean, hope is resistance. Hope is resistance. Hope is resilience. Hope, rebellions are built on hope. it's all a chain to lead to that moment, which of course bleeds into Rogue One, which bleeds into A New Hope. It all comes back to that, and you have to try. Because if you don't try, someone's going to make that decision for you, whether you want to or not. So do it and try, I say.
James, okay, so Andor and Star Wars tell completely different stories, except the same characters. Star Wars is about the Skywalkers, the chosen ones, and Andor is more about the rest of us. It's about all the galactic citizens, and they operate by different rules. The rules are different for the chosen ones and the Skywalkers. In Andor, what it shows, and in the next manifesto specifically, the rest of us have a purpose to create moments of defiance, which will flood the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. So I think Luke Skywalker, Anakin, they're the single things that have big moments and they change. But it takes many regular people to create conditions for the great people, the chosen ones, to do their thing. So many people sacrifice to create that situation. The message, when we're shown that, is the message to the audience. It's to us. And you too can promote freedom, break tyranny, you can resist. You should stand up for what you believe and be seen standing up.
And so, that last one there, not only try, but be seen trying. Because if you're seen, somebody else will have the courage also to try. And I want to give a big round of applause to our panelists.